What are we discussing on today's Locked on Diamondbacks podcast? What should Alek Thomas's role be in the Dbacks outfield? And who are the Dbacks candidates that need the biggest bounce back in 2025?
You are Locked on Diamondbacks, your daily Arizona Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. You're listening to who? The always charismatic host of this podcast, Millard Thomas. I'm a multimedia journalist and I'm a graphic designer. So please go check out my website, millardthomas24.myportfolio.com. On there you can see all my latest work, from my packages to my articles to my photos and my graphic design. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Download the app today or head to FanDuel.com to get started. On today's Locked on Diamondbacks podcast, we're going to be discussing what should Alek Thomas's role be in the Dbacks outfield in 2025, and who are the players that need the biggest bounce backs for the Dbacks this upcoming season. We'll power rank those players. So a whole bunch I want to talk to you guys about today. Thank you for making Locked on Diamondbacks your first listen every day. I would not be able to do this podcast without you, my loyal listeners, sharing, subscribing, reviewing, doing all that so I could do this podcast for you. Thank you. It's free. It's available on all platforms, so please continue to tell your friends. And one of those platforms is YouTube. Please hit subscribe to Locked on Diamondbacks on YouTube. Now let's get into the podcast, and I want to discuss Alek Thomas and what his role should be with the D-backs in 2025, because right now the D-backs are talking a lot about the importance of defense and, of course, outfield defense. I would say during the Mike Hazen, Torey Lovullo era, defense has been the calling card of this team. You look at this team the last few years, by the metrics defensively, it's been one of the best groups in baseball since 2017. I mean, you've had Goldschmidt and Christian Walker, Nick Ahmed, Perdomo, Ketel Marte, Corbin Carroll, Alek Thomas. Like, you've had defensive studs come through the door the last few years, and defense, I think, has been the biggest strength of Arizona since Torey's been a manager, since Mike Hazen has been the GM. I think that's been the calling card of this team, and once again, they want defense to be the emphasis and like the identity of this D-backs team in 2025. And when they're discussing like how they're going to lay out their outfield for next season, especially when it comes to the defensive lineups, I mean, Mike Hazen at least has talked a lot about it being situational and like matchup dependent, right? It might depend on who's the pitcher on the mound for the D-backs, or who's the guys that are going to come up to the plate. Like, all that might matter for who's going to be in the outfield defensively for Arizona. And when I'm thinking about how Alek Thomas plays into all of this, I want to know, like, are we going to see Alek Thomas get playing time? Because we know he's an elite defensive player, but struggles offensively. Like, are the D-backs going to put his elite defense in the outfield, in center field, and sacrifice playing time from someone that might be more offensively adept? I don't know. That's my biggest question right now, because of course the D-backs are being like coy in terms of how they're going to lay out their defense going forward. Like, it's still early in spring training, still early in camp. So Lovullo's not committing to anything right now, right? We see with the closer role, we all think is going to be Justin Martinez, but Torey Lovullo still saying, I don't know. We got to go through camp. We got to make everyone earn their job, which I totally respect. But we all know it's going to be J Mart. Even Kevin Ginkel, who, according to like Lovullo and like Hazen, is in like the competition for closer. But according to Ginkel, he's like, I'm not even worried about the closer role. I'm just trying to go out there and be the best version of myself. And so that's just kind of how camp is right now. We don't know who the closer is going to be, even though we all kind of know. And for the D-backs outfield, how it's going to be laid out, Lovullo, Hazen, they've been coy about it. They're just right now saying they're just focusing and emphasizing the importance of defense. And so I want to know if they're going to prioritize defense way more than they're going to prioritize offense, because right now, Alek Thomas just isn't a good enough offensive player to justify playing him over guys like Gurriel, Carroll, or Jake McCarthy. Like, McCarthy started 2024 behind Alek Thomas in the depth chart, but he stole the job from Thomas. Thomas got hurt. McCarthy started playing against left-handed pitching, and he dominated in those situations as a left-handed batter, earned playing time for the whole season, and ended up being a crucial factor for the D-backs offensively in the second half of the season, especially with all the injuries that we saw to this team. At one point, Jake McCarthy, for like a 2-3 week stretch, was the best D-backs offensive player carrying this lineup. And we've just never seen flashes of offensive potential like that from Alek Thomas. We know defensively, he's fantastic. We know he's great in that area, but just hard for me to justify playing him in the outfield because of his defense over guys like a Jake McCarthy, a Gurriel, a Corbin Carroll, or even a Randall Grichuk. Until Alek Thomas's bat starts to come around, he just can't be in the lineup as often as I would want him to be, because as much as I like that postseason he had in 2023, where he was clobbering home runs for the D-backs, it hasn't translated yet to the regular season. Right now, the sample size of the regular season vastly outweighs that small sample size that we saw in the playoffs. Right now, Alek Thomas, even coming off last year, still had a ground ball rate around 60%, like just way too low. The man just hits on the ground way too often. The exit velocity is there. The hard hit stats are there. They're telling you the ball jumping off the bat of Alek Thomas. The issue is he's just not elevating it at all. And so if he can get better offensively, then yeah, he can talk me into playing Alek Thomas more. But right now, his defense doesn't justify or outweigh how poor his offensive showing is. And it's not like the D-backs outfield defense right now is slouches without Alek Thomas. If you look at the D-backs defense last season, there was only one other NL team that had 3 outfielders in the top 21 of defensive runs saved. That was the Milwaukee Brewers. Carroll, McCarthy, Gurriel, all top 21 guys in defensive runs saved. If you look at ultimate zone rating, one other team had 3 outfielders in the top 20 of ultimate zone rating. Again, the Milwaukee Brewers. And if you look at outs above average in the outfield, only one team had 3 outfielders in the top 3, or only one team had 3 outfielders in the top 13. That was, again, the D-backs with McCarthy, Gurriel, and Carroll. So if you look at defensive run saved, ultimate zone rating, and outs above average, that trio is arguably the best in baseball already without Alek Thomas. And so we don't need to keep saying we need Thomas's defense in the lineup. It's that crucial, because without it, the D-backs defense can't do anything. Like, none of that's true. This D-backs defense already without Thomas is elite. Already arguably the best trio defensively in the National League. I think you could put Milwaukee's trio above Arizona's, but if you're telling me we still have the second best defensive outfield trio in the National League, like, I think I would take that. Jake McCarthy's an athletic speed monster. So is Corbin Carroll. And then Lourdes Gurriel just seems to have great instincts, always knows where the wall is. And so it's like this D-backs defense in the outfield already is fantastic. Randall Grichuk wasn't exactly a slouch out there last year either. Outs above average wasn't great for him, but defensive run saved and ultimate zone rating was very above average for Grichuk last year. And so if you're telling me you already have 3 great defenders in the outfield plus a solid defender in Grichuk, it's hard for me to justify playing Alek Thomas also in the outfield just because of his defense. Right now, until Alek Thomas's offense comes around, he just probably has to be a late game defensive substitution guy or a pinch hitter until the offense becomes more on par with his defense. Now we'll talk about the D-backs players that need to have the biggest bounce back for Arizona in 2025 in segment number 2. In sports, having a winning strategy is everything. It's how the best teams make it to the Super Bowl, the World Series, and the Olympics. The same goes for life. Having a strategy like life insurance from SelectQuote can protect your financial legacy and keep your family's future secure. SelectQuote makes it easy to find the perfect life insurance policy. As one of America's leading insurance brokers with nearly 40 years of experience, they've helped over 2 million customers find $700 billion in coverage since 1985. What sets SelectQuote apart is their personal touch. Unlike other brokers that offers one-size-fits-all policies, their licensed agents tailor coverage to fit your unique needs. If you're in good health, you might even qualify for same-day coverage up to $5 million, no medical exam required, and it's more affordable than you think. You can get up to $1 million in coverage for as little as $20 a month. Get the right life insurance for you for less at selectquote.com/lockedon. Go to selectquote.com/lockedon today to get started. That's selectquote.com/lockedon. SelectQuote, they shop, you save. All right. Let's get back into the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast and let's discuss the D-backs players that need. Let's power rank the D-backs players that need the biggest bounce back in 2025. And I just now saw some news by the D-backs. It looks like they signed Shelby Miller to a minor league deal. Shelby Miller, a guy that, back in the past, the D-backs traded for, right, in that Dansby Swanson deal, right? We got the number 1 pick and we're like, hey, let's trade it for Shelby Miller. We thought we were going to go all in. We thought it was a chance for the D-backs to really, potentially go to that tier of World Series contenders, and it did not happen with Shelby Miller. He comes to Arizona and was atrocious, 6.15 ERA that first season, but now he's back as more of a reliever. He was not that great last year with Detroit, but the year prior with the LA Dodgers was fantastic with the Dodgers with a 1.71 ERA. And so, yeah, if you could get that guy, that's a fantastic pickup. He's still great in terms of limiting contact, in terms of not giving up walks. The strikeout numbers are decent. Last year, the ERA was kind of high, but maybe it was something where the advanced stats tell you he was a lot better than what the ERA says, but the FIP was pretty close to what the ERA is. So that at least tells you the ERA was aligned with what it was supposed to be. So at least when you bring in Shelby Miller, you get a guy who's not going to give up a ton of contact, not going to walk a ton of guys, and have decent strikeout rate. The biggest issue is, can he not give up home runs? Because that was probably his biggest problem last season. And that probably led to the increase in his ERA going from the Dodgers to the Tigers. And so interesting pickup by the D-backs. We'll see if he makes it through spring training on the opening day roster, because right now the D-backs bullpen is absolutely loaded and there's just not a lot of spots for people to be in the bullpen, sadly, because when you think about how it's broken down right now, I mean, you got Martinez, AJ Puck, Kevin Ginkel, Ryan Thompson, still got Joe Mansply, just signed Kendall Graveman, who has to be there. And then we're going with the 5-man rotation. So in theory, Brandon Pfaadt should be up for the bullpen. Ryan Nelson, still got Dre Jamison, Seth Martinez, Bryce Jarvis, Kyle Nelson. It's like the bullpen options are actually pretty good for the D-backs. So we'll see if Shelby Miller can make the opening day roster, but I do at least like him as a minor league addition that we could get through spring training and see in camp and see if he's at least good, see what level he's still at. So I do like this little pickup by the Arizona Diamondbacks. But now let's talk about the D-backs players that potentially can bounce back in 2025 and the players that need to have the biggest bounce back in 2025 for Arizona. These are the players where if they bounce back, it would produce the biggest impact on the team. I'm going to start with a couple of honorable mentions because the first guy I want to discuss is Zach Gallen, who I don't know if everyone would agree with me saying he's a bounce back candidate because the numbers were still fine for Gallen, 28 starts, a 3.65 ERA. But for me, I just didn't think he was that great last year. I think the numbers are actually better than what the eye test says because, like, even if you look at the way he finished the season, the strikeout numbers were there. He had a ton of Ks to end the year, but a lot of games where he only went 5 innings and still gave up 3 or 4 earned runs. There were just so many starts last year where maybe he had a ton of strikeouts, maybe looked decent, but still wouldn't pitch that deep into the ball game and would give up like 3, 4, 5 earned runs. Like, I just did not think it was like a good Gallen season, and maybe the injury he suffered, he wasn't the same post-injury, so you could at least give him a built-in excuse, some grace at the very least. I just didn't think it was a great season for Zach Gallen last year, and I think if we could get the guy that we saw during that scoreless streak, the guy that we thought could win a Cy Young, like that's the Zach Gallen we need in 2025. That guy's your number 2 starter. That guy's the elite. If we see the guy we saw more of last season over the course of a full year, that guy's still great. He's still a great number 2 starter, but he's not the guy that we saw a couple years ago when he was mowing down hitters left and right. So I want to see Zach Gallen bounce back to that scoreless level streak and not the guy that was like inconsistent or a guy that could get you 10 strikeouts last year, but still give up like 5 innings and 3 earned runs. Like he just wasn't as dominant as he can be. And so I do want to see a bounce back for Zach Gallen in 2025. And now we'll start with the top of my pyramid for guys who need to bounce back for the D-backs next season. This is number 1 in my power rankings. The guy who can make the biggest impact if he bounces back next season. And it's a guy who started to bounce back in a big way in the second half for the D-backs in 2024. Corbin Carroll, this is the obvious answer. This is the guy who won Rookie of the Year in 2023, finished 5th in MVP voting. We thought he could potentially take another step forward, another leap. It didn't happen. He had a sophomore slump where he still produced a 3.5 WAR season, according to Baseball Reference, still led the league in triples. But if Corbin Carroll can do what he did in the second half of the season over the course of 2025, that is a guy who is definitely going to make the All-Star team. That is a guy who is going to get some MVP votes because in the second half of last year, the average still wasn't great, 259, but we don't care about the average as much when you put up a 351 OBP and a 568 slugging for a 919 OPS. And in his last 64 games last year, he had 17 home runs. He went on a power surge in the second half last year, and that's why I want to see for Corbin Carroll in 2025. I don't care if he bats 260, but if he puts up a 900 OPS with 35 bombs and 45 stolen bases, I would be very happy with that kind of season. Corbin Carroll is still, I believe, the most dynamic player the D-backs have. Ketel Marte, I mean, what he did last season definitely has shown the highest ceiling probably so far because even Corbin Carroll's Rookie of the Year season wasn't as good as what Ketel Marte did last year. But I still think if Corbin Carroll hits his potential, the best version of Corbin Carroll can still be better than the best version of Marte. Because the best version of Corbin Carroll, I think, can hit as many home runs that Marte hit last year. I think Carroll has that 30 to 35 home run potential. Plus, he can still 50 to like 70 bags, play pretty elite defense in right field, and just be so much more of like a guy that I think wreaks havoc because of that speed. And so for Corbin Carroll, if he bounces back for Arizona, he's still our most dynamic player. And offensively, you saw in the second half of last season what he does when he taps into that power. If Corbin Carroll bounces back in a big way, especially with guys like Christian Walker leaving, Jock Peterson leaving, we're going to need a little bit more juice from other guys in our lineup. Corbin Carroll is the guy that I still look at. If he's going and he's playing at the best version possible where he's looking like that guy that we saw win Rookie of the Year, this D-backs lineup is going to be scary to stop despite losing Christian Walker and Jock Peterson. So that's why Corbin Carroll is number 1 in my power ranking for guys that need to bounce back and can make the biggest impact for Arizona next season. I just got a few more bounce back candidates to discuss for the D-backs in 2025 in segment number 3. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. That's $300 to keep the action going. FanDuel is the app that is easy to navigate, and the variety of bets keeps every game exciting. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly, no waiting around for your winnings. Whether you're betting on your favorite team or just looking to add some extra excitement to the playoffs, FanDuel has you covered. My favorite thing to do on FanDuel is the same game parlay. Whenever the Suns are playing, give me KD over on 25 points, give me Booker over on 25, and give me the Suns money line. When it hits, which is not very often, it brings a big smile to my face. If you want a big smile on your face, just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $300 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, back here on the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. So let's discuss my last few candidates for bounce back players for Arizona in 2025. The guys that can make the biggest impact if they bounce back for Arizona. Number 2 on my list, I have Eduardo Rodriguez, E-Rod, because he's number 2 because he is still getting paid a nice chunk of change by Arizona, and he needs to start justifying that contract. I know Jordan Montgomery's also getting paid a lot of money, but E-Rod is getting $20 million this year, $21 million next year, $19 million, and then a $17 million mutual option. That is a lot of money for a guy who had a 5.04 ERA and only pitched 50 innings last season. Like, as much as we talk about Jordan Montgomery, E-Rod was equally bad. He wasn't durable, and we know when signing him, he was an injury risk, and it took no time for him to get hurt. He didn't even make it to opening day before sustaining an injury. And so for E-Rod, he needs to bounce back, because getting a contract like that and not performing, and now you're also just clogging up the rotation, like, that's kind of the biggest thing, my biggest problem. We got Burns, we got Gallen, we got Kelly. I want Fott and I want Ryan Nelson to be in the rotation, but they are currently blocked by E-Rod, his exorbitant contract, and Jordan Montgomery. And I would be okay with either E-Rod or Monty, but the fact that we got 2 lefties who were not good for the Dbacks last year, who are both extremely ineffective, and expensive, doesn't make me very happy. And now we have to squeeze out 2 young, cheap, controllable assets who have potential, who are ascending. Doesn't make me happy. So E-Rod needs to bounce back, because right now he's being shadowed by Jordan Montgomery's season last season. He's being shadowed by Jordan Montgomery's year last season, but E-Rod was just as bad. And the fact that he has a few more years remaining on his contract makes him number 2 in my power ranking. And that moves me to number 3 on my list. And the other guy we just discussed, Jordan Montgomery. And like I said, the reason he's not number 2 is because he's a pending free agent on an expiring deal. So we know at least at the end of the season, Jordan Montgomery is gone regardless. But he did have a worse season than E-Rod. I mean, a 6.23 ERA, but at least he pitched double the innings that E-Rod had last season. They were both equally bad, both equally terrible. Neither one of them you ever felt good about when they were on the mound. And it felt like instantaneously, first, second inning, those guys would just get rocked. It wouldn't be like the kind of start where it's like, oh, 3 or 4 good innings, and then they give up 5 earned runs in the last inning. No, those guys would be rocked immediately to start games. And Jordan Montgomery, coming off the World Series where he beats Arizona and then comes to Arizona and just was terrible the whole year. It's like a double deuce against Arizona. You're going to beat us, and then you're going to be bad for us and be like a critical reason as to why we don't make the playoffs, because of Jordan Montgomery is just a little bit better last season. D-backs probably make the postseason. I mean, you win 89 games and you get a 6.23 ERA from Monty, a 5.04 ERA from E-Rod. If one of those guys is just like in the 4s for their ERA, D-backs probably make it to the playoffs. And so Monty and E-Rod both need to bounce back in a big way, because when you have your offense lead the league in like every category, you win 89 games and you still don't make it to the playoffs with 3 wildcard spots, because it feels like your pitching is the area that holds you back. And the 2 most expensive guys on your team are the 2 guys that performed or the 2 guys that produce the least were the 2 guys that were most ineffective in both E-Rod and Jordan Montgomery. That's why those 2 guys have the most pressure to bounce back, because you can't be the most expensive and be the worst players on your roster. So we're looking at those 2 guys as number 2 and number 3 in our power rankings. And then finally, the last guy I want to discuss is not even a guy who had a terrible season last year, but I just want to see him become like a little bit more consistent game to game, or at least month to month. Lourdes Gurriel, I thought he was way better in 2023 as opposed to 2024. And it wasn't like he was bad last year. It's more like the overall consistency and even some of the power output that we saw in 2023 from Lourdes Gurriel. Because you look at his season last year and his numbers just fluctuated so much. He was great in like the first month of the season, struggled in the second month, great in the third month, struggled again. It was just like so up and down for Lourdes Gurriel. He ended up finishing the season with pretty decent numbers, honestly, not too far off from what he had in 2023. I mean, he finished with a 280 average, so like the average was there. The OPS wasn't far off from what he did in 2023 either, but I need him to bounce back with a little bit more consistency and honestly, a little bit more power. He had 24 home runs in 2023. He had 18 in 2024. His overall offensive output probably wasn't too far off from 23, but I felt like the level of consistency and the power he had in 23 was just more. And I felt like he was more clutch in 23 as well. He felt like a guy they could trust a little bit more in clutch situations. I mean, he had an 853 OPS in 2023. So he was definitely a guy that was really strong and really impactful in those clutch situations. And last year, a 781 OPS with runners in scoring position just didn't feel as reliable. So if you could get a little bit more consistent in the clutch, a little bit more consistent month to month, and tap into a little bit more power, I'm not out asking for a big bounce back from Lourdes Gurriel, just a little bit, because I just felt like he wasn't as good last year as he was in 2024. So just want to squeeze a little bit more juice out the tube of Lourdes Gurriel's potential. Now that's it for this edition of the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. Come back tomorrow for more Diamondbacks news coverage and insight. And as always, stay safe, stay healthy. Deuces.